Hello, my name's Kerry Lewis and I'm a member of the MrBruff.com writing team. Today I'm going to talk about how to use the comma. The first use of the comma is with numbers that are higher than 999. For example, the moon is 384,400 kilometers away from Earth. The second use is with direct address. This is when you're talking to someone and saying their name. You need to separate the name with a comma. For example, we're going to learn to cut and paste Jane. If there's no comma, the meaning can change quite significantly. For example, we're going to learn to cut and paste Jane. Now it sounds as if Jane is going to be cut up and pasted to something. The next use of the comma is to separate items in a list. Again, if you don't have a comma, it can affect the meaning of the sentence. I love cooking my family and my pets. There's no comma, so it sounds like once you've cooked them, you're going to eat them. We need to have that comma to separate the items in the list. I love cooking, my family and my pets. Now the meaning's much clearer. In the UK, we don't put a comma before the word and it's the same with or. You can have potato, chips or bread. But there is one exception. Let's read this example. I love my dogs, Fred and Martha. The meaning is unclear. Does the speaker have two dogs and their names are Fred and Martha? Or does the speaker love 1, the dogs, 2, Fred, and 3, Martha? Well, we need to have a comma to make the meaning clearer. Now that we have a comma before and, we know that the speaker loves 1, the dogs, 2, Fred, and 3, Martha. The comma before and is called the Oxford comma, and it's used to make meaning a little bit clearer. The next use of the comma is with speech marks. If the speaker is first, the comma is after the verb. If the speaker is last, the comma is before the closing speech marks. And when we have a sentence that's been split and the speaker's been dropped in it, the speaker is separated by commas. I've made a video about how to use speech marks, and that's in my punctuation playlist if it's of interest. The next use of the comma is to bracket off extra information. For example, Joe, who's going to the party, scored full marks in the maths exam. Here, the commas are like brackets. The information inside them is not very important. You could delete it and it would make no difference to the sentence. Who is a relative pronoun. Let's look at some more examples. I've bought a drone, which I've used once. Because we have the comma before the relative pronoun which, we can drop this part of the sentence and it wouldn't really matter. And here's another example. This is Molly, who likes to dye her hair. With both of these sentences, the information after the comma is less important and we could drop it if we wanted to. We can also use the comma to mark off introductory words or phrases where we would normally pause to take a breath. For example, yes, I understand, and I see. Words like yes and express sudden feelings or emotions. If you say these words loudly, like the children in the picture, you would probably replace the commas with exclamation marks. You also have a comma with a sentence that begins with an adverb, a word that describes a verb. For example, suddenly he left. And then we have the comma to separate adjectives when they begin a sentence. Exciting and action-packed, comma, the film delighted the audience, and the adjectives describe the noun film. Two more examples. When a sentence begins with a word or phrase to do with time, it's separated with a comma. For example, the next day, she left. You could say once upon a time, comma, there was a fairy, or tomorrow, comma, whatever word to do with time, you use a comma. And finally, you use it with a phrase that begins with a preposition. A preposition tells you where something is. For example, on the table, comma, I saw my phone. Next, we use the comma in a compound sentence. This is when both halves of the sentence make sense by themselves. For example, I went to the market, that makes sense by itself. I bought some apples, that makes sense by itself. We join both halves of the sentence with a coordinating conjunction, often known as a fanboys conjunction, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Then we put a comma before it. If the sentence is very short, we sometimes don't need a comma. Our next use of the comma is with words like however. However is a transition word or a conjunctive adverb. It shows how one idea relates to another. For example, I like chocolate. However, my brother prefers crisps. So now we see how the idea of the brother preferring crisps links to the first idea of I like chocolate. This example has a semicolon before however and then the comma. But you can just have the comma. However, comma, that's when however is the first word in a sentence. If it's in the middle of a sentence, it's separated by commas, and if it's at the end of a sentence, again there's a comma before it. Here are similar words and they follow the same rules. Finally, we use the comma in a complex sentence to separate the subordinate clause from the main clause when the subordinate clause is first. A complex sentence has one main clause that makes sense by itself and at least one subordinate clause that doesn't. For example, although I'm not keen on Brussels sprouts, I did my best to eat them all. I did my best to eat them all makes sense by itself, so it's a main clause. Although I'm not keen on Brussels sprouts doesn't make sense by itself because the information is incomplete, so it's a subordinate clause. There are different ways of beginning subordinate clauses. But if you do begin a sentence with a subordinate clause, you separate it from the main clause with a comma. Let's look at some other examples. Hearing no reply, she assumed he was out. Picked only this morning. The strawberries taste delicious. To pass my exam, I need to learn more facts. I've made videos that explain these in a lot more detail, and they're in my sentences playlist. Let's look at a common mistake before we leave. That is comma splicing. Comma splicing is when you use a comma instead of a full stop. I picked up my keys, then I went out. So how can we deal with this? First of all, you could use a full stop and create two sentences. Another option is to add the word and, keep the comma, and this now is a compound sentence. Or you could ditch the comma, ditch and, replace with the semicolon, and then we have a very impressive looking compound sentence. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to buy a copy of Mr. Bruff's Guide to Grammar, I've put the links in the description below. In the meantime, please like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you in the next video.